Welcome to the webinar today, everyone. My name is Matt Jacobson. I am the Online Learning Coordinator for the Learning Technology Center of Illinois. I'd like to remind everyone that we are recording this webinar today. Recordings will be posted on YouTube within 24 to 48 hours of the end of the event today. Illinois PD credit is also available for those attending live during the broadcast today. Evaluations will be mailed to all of our live participants within 24 to 48 hours as well. If you have any questions today, please type those into the chat or the Q&A. If you do use the chat, please make sure that little blue drop-down menu reads everyone. You can just click it to toggle through the different options. If it says everyone, we can all read your questions and benefit from the responses more easily. Today, we are joined by Lucia, Cambria, and a whole team who are going to be giving us a little bit of insight on how to ensure equity and access for our students. And they will also, as they introduce themselves, I'm going to put you on the spot and tell us what your preference is. Is it Newsela, Newsela, or Newsela? Lucia, you want to give us a start?
Yes, absolutely. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll kick off some introductions. Thank you, Matt, for having us. We're so grateful to be with everybody here today, both live and recorded. Thank you for your time. And we'll jump right in with some introductions. Matt took care of all of our housekeeping needs, but as he said, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to be able to answer your questions live and in the moment. And I'm sorry that I don't get to see your little squares and your faces in this format, but know that, again, we're really grateful for you coming out to support your students in ensuring equity and access. So I'll kick us off with some introductions here. It's important to know who you're hearing from in the Zoom room. I'll be doing a bulk of the presenting and the chatting today. My name is Lucia Cambria, and I work as a curricular solution architect here in the Central Region, serving specifically the state of Illinois and our district partners. My work is aligning Newsela's best-in-class resources and solutions with districts' particular visions, goals, and priorities. My career has been in education forever, and this is, in fact, at Newsela, Matt, Newsela, like umbrella. This is, in fact, my first non-school-based role. I live and work remotely in Washington, D.C., where I most recently was a middle school vice principal and an instructional coach. I have only ever worked in schools and settings with a high population of students with special needs, coaching teachers in a multitude of ways to better reach and support those kiddos at the margins. This work has often involved finding the right curricular resources to suit students' interest levels, their limitations, and their social emotional learning skills. So working with Newsela has really been a great way to serve even more students in that capacity. I'm joined by two lovely colleagues of mine, Nicky Dunlap and Amy Turany-Mayer. So I'd love for them to introduce themselves as well.
Hi everyone, Nicky Dunlap. I am the Illinois Partnership Manager here at Newsela, which really just means I am kind of the go-to person who you would work with when starting conversations about Newsela with Newsela. I'm here to support districts across the state. I only cover Illinois, so solely focused on supporting our students and our teachers in Illinois. I've been working in the ed tech space for about 15 years. And I live in the Chicago area in the western suburbs in Glen Ellen. So currently we've got well over 100 district partnerships in the state. So it's been so exciting rolling out, all of the new changes at Newsela and all the new exciting things that we have to offer. So very excited that you're here. Thank you for joining us. And I guess I will conclude by saying I'm going to go with Newsela, although we hear all of it. I actually heard Newsela recently. So that was a new one for me. So Matt, we can add that as the fourth option in the questionnaire next time. But I will pass it over to Amy. Thanks.
Thanks, Nikki. Yep, I'm Amy Turany-Mayer. I'm our lead accessibility engineer. My role at Newsela is how I pronounce it. My role at Newsela is working in all things accessibility. So helping teams across our entire organization bring accessibility into their awareness, their action plans. We all have a role to play in keeping our product accessible. And so just incredibly proud to be working on a product that takes this so seriously. I don't have an education background unless you count, you know, a 19-year-old and a 15-year-old and being vice president of a PTA and fundraisers. And
Definitely, we count that. We count that, Amy.
Don't we count that? Okay, fair. Okay, good. Yeah, so incredibly, I just am so very pleased to be part of this. So happy to answer any questions you all have today. I will say one quick thing, screen readers, which you'll hear about today, pronounce Newsela in kind of different ways. And when editing captions, I've seen New Zealand and Newzilla, like Godzilla. So, you know, it's all right. However you want to say it, we get what you're saying.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us both today. They're both here to answer your questions in the chat. And if anything comes up that needs more voiceover, they'll be joining in as well. So a quick look at our agenda today on what we will be covering before we jump into some reflection and get our thinking caps on here. So we just did some introductions and then we'll be talking accessibility in the classroom. We'll be talking Illinois and WCAG, which is a fun acronym, which you'll be hearing quite a bit about today. So get used to hearing that. And then we'll talk Newsela and accessibility, and we will talk about some of the updates that we have in the platform to support this. So I think it's really important, especially in the education space, to take a step back before jumping into really exciting and different content and think about our own experiences, both as educators and as learners. So I often in professional learning settings, I think it's really helpful to think about things both in your teacher, your educator hat, and your learner hat. But obviously, knowing educators, we often wear 7,000 more hats than that. And funny that Amy brought up the parent thing. The amount of sixth graders I had call me mom or grandma over the years just shows you just how many hats these educators wear. But let's take a minute to reflect on some examples from our career as educators or as learners. Maybe in the K-12 environment, or maybe even in your most recent grad school classes. What are some times when you or your teacher has built a bridge to help you learn a concept? And feel free to use the chat here. And then on the flip side of that, what barriers have, even with the best of intentions, maybe we created as educators? Or maybe what barriers were in your way of learning as a student? We'd love to hear from you. Again, if you click that little everyone in the chat, what bridges have you built or were built for you? And what barriers got in the way of your learning? We'll take some time to reflect. I know it's sort of a meaty question, but we hope to hear from you. One thing I think about quite a bit in this space is that relevancy gap being a big barrier. And I remember as a student asking why we had to learn certain things. I think the most relevant example, and one you see all over the internet, is the Pythagorean theorem. Why do we have to learn this? Why do we have to learn this? Why do we have to learn this? And I think students today, because they have so much different access to information and wider access in some respects, I think they're asking it even more forcefully. And so relevance then can be a real barrier that gets in the way of students really learning deeply about a concept. I think a bridge can be as simple as a graphic organizer, something that helps students organize their thinking, has some boxes, even something like this, tabs on a notebook, right? That's a bridge to helping organize myself and make sure that I can do my job to the best of my ability. So keep in mind bridges and barriers as we move forward. And what are some of our key takeaways today? So we're going to learn about WCAG. We're going to talk about a checklist, and we are going to think about what it means for student learning. Then we're going to experience some Newsela content, of course, and think about how these resources can support your district with literacy efforts and creating a more accessible student experience. And then we're going to see how some of Newsela's other features enhance accessibility and equity in the classroom. And so we hope that you can take away some of these pieces and put them into practice tomorrow. So let's take this a little bit closer to home, to this state. This section will talk about why WCAG matters in the state and for our specific students. Well, first and foremost, as many of you likely know, the state legislature has adopted the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as the standard and the framework through which online curricula needs to be vetted. This historic legislation is an important guidepost and signal to schools and to educators as a whole that the support of students who are impacted by their significant disabilities really can have that equitable access to the same rigorous academic program as the rest of their classmates. So just thought it was really important to ground us first in the legislation. But let's think about why this legislation came about, right? Why does this matter? And what is WCAG? So the WCAG guidelines and where they came from. Well, they're a set of rules put forth by the World Wide Web Consortium, many people who work on this consortium actually have significant disabilities, which is important that folks who are creating the guidelines are also those that are benefiting from these things and have in the past, unfortunately, had limitations to their access. These guidelines really represent a gold standard for determining whether a website is supportive for those who have accessibility needs. And unfortunately, many websites have not undergone the process to reach this level of compliance, making much of the web and often educational technology and educational content inaccessible for a large subset of students and individuals. And just exactly how large are those numbers? Well, approximately 14% of US students receive services for disabilities in public schools. That's hundreds of thousands of kids. So we can safely conclude that many of those students would have trouble navigating through sites and material that are not WCAG compliant. But at the same time, in this time of a proliferation of educational technology tools and distance learning and hybrid learning, almost a revolution of digital access and digital web content being used in the classroom, they're being asked to do so much of their work online, these students. And this number is nearly identical in the state of Illinois. And chances are there are students in your classroom who are impacted with disabilities who you may not even be receiving these legal services yet. And therefore they may have some unseen barriers which are blocking their access to meaningful classroom learning. So this really connects back to our earlier discussion, right? Our reflection at the top. And it results in Newsela's company commitment to equity and accessibility. And we look at this compliance as mission aligned and not just something that's nice to have on our platform, but really as a form of equity and disability justice. So we'll jump into this next section here and really think about, I've said a lot of words, but I think visuals of non-compliance really help ground us in some of the challenges that folks with disabilities experience daily as they move across the web. Hopefully this gives you an idea of some of those barriers that your students or that individuals with disabilities face while navigating the web. And with so many, as I said, new and shiny educational technology products proliferating across schools, this is especially important to us as educators. So our first example here, is around contrast. So contrast is a really big deal for folks with low vision. And fields like this one pictured above, so this is a non-example, right, of WCAG compliance. I want to make sure I note that. These are difficult for even people without significant vision challenges to read and navigate. If I don't know what to put in what field here, where my first name goes, where my last name goes, where my email goes, where my password goes, you can just imagine the consequences. I can't properly log in or use single sign-on. I think this, Matt, you were talking about being a middle school educator. I remember the days of having to hand out those little slips of paper for my students to be able to log in to their different education technology products, and what a blocker that was, and what a time-consuming effort that was. It took the place of actual meaningful instructional time. And so this is very similar to that. It's not getting to the meat and potatoes of the lesson. It's a blocker even before the person is accessing the actual content here. The next challenge that often occurs within non-compliant websites are keyboard traps. So you may or may not be aware that many folks use a keyboard to navigate their computer because of this disability, not using a mouse at all. And many websites, which are not WCAG compliant, have what we call keyboard traps. This screen recording, which I'm gonna hit play on right here, oops. Sorry, technical difficulties here. I'll take it out of present mode there. Oh no. Well, I'll explain it then. Sorry about that. So what you're seeing right here is a website, and not all of the elements, as somebody who is tabbing through, not all of the elements receive focus, and they don't actually tab through in a logical format. And what happens then, as you can see sort of in this screen grab right here, that some of the elements don't receive focus. So if I want to get to shop, which is the logical order after listen and classes, if it gets skipped over, I'm not able to access the website in the way that it's meant to be accessed. Here's another piece. Some screen readers will not be able to read the errors that pop up here. So the person trying to enter their information has no idea why when they click submit, it's not working. And that's a web content accessibility challenge there. It's really, again, going to just put time into something that shouldn't be taking up so much time, particularly in the classroom. This one I think is a really interesting example, because visually, as I look at this website, maybe to some of us, it looks visually appealing. There's different colors and there's contrast, but actually within the website, there is a background movement. And for students with attention challenges, that instead of the focus being on the words here, it tends to be focused on other elements. And that makes it really difficult for students to read. And I think that one, that's sort of an unseen challenge for a lot of our students. So what can we do to actually begin to remedy some of these issues? Well, as Amy mentioned at the beginning, it's really on all of us as educators to be able to look at the content we're putting in front of students. And there's a lot on this WCAG checklist here, and it comes from I have the citation here, and we'll include it in its full form. We're just pulling out some of these headlines here. Oops. So some of these guidelines provide a checklist for us, and when we're looking at our different web content resources, our different online curricula, we can say, are these things at play, and really make that reflection so that we can better the experience for our students. So again, back to our last NOT example here, avoiding content that may cause seizures or physical harm due to sensitivity and flashing content. That is a really easy one for us to visually notice as our students are navigating through different web content. And it's great that Illinois has put this legislation in place so that everybody is held accountable to these standards, and that we can all make sure that we are doing our best for our students. So now that we've looked at what web content accessibility isn't, let's think about what it is, and we'll use some Newsela examples to do that. First, just a quick voiceover on how the student experience in Newsela is compliant with those WCAG guidelines. So when using Newsela, students can navigate Newsela with a keyboard, and they can access the information with the proper contrast, alternative text on images, including the photos, the illustrations, the graphs, and the charts. As Newsela moves towards a lot more multimedia content, this is super important. I even think about some of these, some of our videos having that attached transcript with them. That's just standard practice at Newsela. It's ensuring that all students, regardless of their abilities, are able to access that multimedia. And then the information on the site is consistent. The platform is consistent. As you move from Newsela ELA to Newsela Social Studies, Science, SEL, there's a standard there which allows students to be able to navigate in a really predictable way. If you have ever taught in a school before, you know how important predictability is, so that students have the same experience showing up on a daily basis. And then this big one here around assistive technology, which Amy mentioned, having some interesting Newsela pronunciations. All assistive technology works very well with Newsela because of the way we've designed the platform. That intentionality that we've put to becoming WCAG compliant is reflected in the way students with disabilities can access our content. All right, so we have a little example of what that looks like here. And you'll hear a little bit of Amy's voice here in this demo of, and I just want to make sure I'm sharing my computer sound. We'll watch a little bit of how a screen reader interacts on the platform.
Hello everyone, today I'm doing a short demo of what it's like to navigate the Newsela platform using a screen reader. Screen readers are assistive technology for users with vision impairments. They announce the content and semantics of the page, which help provide structure and context, similar to the way a sighted user gets that context through design and page layout. Screen reader users use keyboard controls to navigate through the web page. A mouse isn't used at all. The page is announced in the linear order of the code, so it's very important to create web pages with accessibility in mind, so the page announcement matches the visual structure. Today I'll be using VoiceOver, which is the Mac's built-in screen reader. For sighted users, there is a visual output of the VoiceOver announcement located in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Let's get started.
Visited link, Newsela home. Visited link, skip to content. Educator Center. Collapsed button.
You'll hear here that the Educator Center button announces, but it also announces with the status of collapsed. Visually, we see a down-facing caret, and that gives us the indication that if we were to select that button, that the content would expand. And so for screen reader users, that status is also added in. So if I were to select this, the status will update.
Educator Center. Expanded button.
So that's just, and we have this video in full for you to share with you after, but it's just an idea of what that screen reader looks like within the platform and how it functions in a logical format. And Amy mentions in that video that the code, the way that the the website is designed is what's contributing to that factor. So it has to be intentional, and it has to be really designed with folks with disabilities in mind. We have another example here, and this is, I think, really, really cool. So I need to open my speaker notes over here, because Amy had to explain this to me, so I had to take copious notes on how this works. So I need my notes for this one. So the screenshot here demonstrates how Newsela works with a Braille display accessibility tool. So in real life, and this is the very cool part, this Braille is actually sent to a display hardware device, so users can read the page instead of listen via screen reader. That hardware device, which is in the person's home, likely on their desk in front of their computer, has pins that move to form the Braille letters underneath the user's fingers. Here, the link to search on Newsela, on the Newsela page, is highlighted, and the Braille conveys that this is a landmark navigation feature that's part of a list and is a link, and it's titled search. So this assistive technology working with the Newsela platform allows folks to understand not just what the web page says, but also how it functions. And I think these technical pieces to accessibility that we've sort of briefly shown here are beyond integral to ensuring that our best-in-class resources and content reach all students in all classrooms. And equity and access also permeates really everything that we do at Newsela. So I want to jump in to the article level student experience to take a look at how some of those features elevate equity and access, even beyond just the way the code is designed on the platform. So this is the anatomy of a Newsela text, and some of the accessibility features, which go, as I mentioned, even beyond the technical aspects. We have added read aloud to every single piece of text on the platform. Again, this is an accessibility feature which is available to all students and users of the platform. It's available not just in English, but also in Spanish, and it highlights each word, each phrase word by word as it's reading aloud. Again, you can imagine how important that is for students who have challenges accessing text, but I even think of it as an engagement tool for all students, right? Many of us are engaged in listening to audiobooks, right? We like the experience of an audiobook versus reading a book sometimes. And we need to extend that same sort of different modality to our students as well. Most people know Newsela for that automatic differentiation, that nonfiction content, which is going to be offered at 5 different reading levels. And that's how Newsela was founded, and that's never going away. We've only expanded that accessibility in terms of lexile levels. So when we are offering content in Spanish, and we have thousands of pieces of content in Spanish, we're also offering the content at 5 different Spanish lexile levels. Of course, teachers often think about accessibility in terms of how they're going to reach their students and in what platform are they going to deliver this lesson. So we integrate with all of the major learning management systems and tools that you're already using. This is so important, again, for sharing with students, for rostering your students, for ensuring that you can give feedback to your students in a really tight loop. The next way that we are enhancing accessibility here is through aligned formative assessments. These allow students the opportunity to react to the text, to respond, to show their learning to their teachers. But with this customizable write prompt, teachers can enhance the accessibility by adding in scaffolds and sentence starters, which can really address the different needs in the classroom. Also, if you're working on something specific in the classroom, maybe your students are working towards a research project, you could take out this Newsela Write prompt and you can write your own or include your research question. You're probably familiar with the 4-question quiz that comes with every Newsela text. This is also aligned to that Lexile level. So even though students may be reading this piece of text at different Lexiles, they are being quizzed and assessed on the same anchor skill. So if this question is asking a main idea question, regardless of the level, everybody's getting a main idea question. It's just going to be suited to their Lexile level. So that, again, that's a piece around accessibility and equity of access, where everybody should have the ability to be assessed on the same skill and learn the same skill if they're in the same classroom. Teacher accessibility is also important to us. So when we think about teachers and what they need to be successful, oftentimes just giving them a text is not enough for really meaningful implementation and meaningful classroom learning. So we've instructionalized our content with lesson sparks so that teachers can really provide meaningful lessons with engaging activities. You can see here, there's a before, a during, and an after reading activity so that students can activate those literacy skills. We have the aligned standards here. One of my favorite pieces within our primary sources are these editor's notes. I think they really serve as a good background knowledge builder here, in a way to get students hooked into what they may be learning about and provide some extra notes. You can see here we have an annotation feature where you can encourage active reading, where you can ask questions, where students can respond to those questions as well. So as we wrap up, I wonder if you would add anything to your bridges and barriers list. Now that we've taken a look at some of those barriers that may be unseen to many of us, are there new barriers which you weren't aware of? And are there new tools that you're thinking about which can build some bridges for your students and allow them that accessibility to equitable learning opportunities? And I do, of course, want to open it up to any questions that may have come up in the chat. Again, you can use the chat feature, you can use the Q&A button. What are we wondering about and what questions may have come in already? I think a question came in around how we're continuing, like as we're adding new features and new things to the platform, how we are continuing that accessibility commitment. Amy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So as we continue to add on to Newsela and enhance features and create new ones, as I mentioned earlier, we have incorporated accessibility into every step of the process. So right from the time where new features are being envisioned and dreamed about, we are talking about accessibility right from the beginning. When we talk about the student population that we're looking to serve, we're thinking about all of our students, all of the Newsela students who could be accessing this content. And so right from the get-go, having users with disabilities at the forefront of our minds when we develop new features and new content just really helps this not be sort of an afterthought. We're not building things and then when we get to the very end, we're going, oh, wait, is it accessible? We're thinking about that right from the very beginning. We have training in place for all of our teams about how their role should be thinking about accessibility, and we have lots of checks and balances in place throughout the entire process. So that's really one of the ways that we ensure that new features are going to be accessible and work for all of our students.
Thanks so much. Kathleen noted in the chat that she didn't previously understand how animated effects could distract focus. Any reflections on that piece?
I could just comment on that to note how, isn't that interesting? Because when we think about user engagement, when we think about student engagement, you think about animated effects could really draw a ton of students in. And so accessibility can be kind of a difficult area, like the web content accessibility guidelines are guidelines for that very reason. Some things that could really help one student can really kind of present some harm to others. So where do we find that middle ground? And so when we look to things like a WCAG checklist, those kind of differences are noted. It's not that you can't have animated content, but you can provide things like a pause button. You can provide things like, if you want to play a GIF, like have it finish within 5 seconds or something like that. You know what I mean? So it's not, accessibility shouldn't be seen as like, oh, if it's accessible, then it's not going to be engaging. Then it's going to be really boring. Rather, we just have to put some accommodations in place to make sure that the user is getting what they need to be able to access the content. But yeah, absolutely. There are so many different types of users, different types of disabilities. It's just really helpful to have those guidelines to look to, because if you're not presented with this on a day-to-day basis, you can have the best of intentions and just not quite understand it, And so companies with this legislation, it really puts the onus on them to do the research and to be providing you with materials that are all set for your students, that you're not having to go, oh no, I can't use this now. Oh, there isn't an accommodation in place. So that's why Illinois is really a leader in that front for making sure that all of the students are considered and given the same equity.
I love that. I think it's all about expanding what our definition of accessibility looks like and understanding that there are different ways in which we can engage students. And
Hey,
different
Lucy, I did get a question private from in the chat as well. I don't know if it was with everybody, but someone did ask, do you do any testing with users who have disabilities? Amy, do you want to handle that one?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So we do, in fact. So we work with a third-party accessibility services company. TPGI is our vendor currently. And so like we have me and we have, everybody being trained on accessibility, but then we also bring in third-party experts to work with us. Their team is made up of all different types of users, all different types of accessibility engineers. Some of them are blind, some might have a cognitive disability, some of them might have some motor function, might be keyboard only users. So that's really wonderful, because as we're moving through creating content and testing it internally, getting it in front of users who use assistive technology natively, use it every single day, they can give us that feedback about how this is actually working for them. You can have good intentions and think I'm being really helpful, but you might actually be creating a barrier that you didn't even intend to. One of the areas we see that, you see that in websites, is with alt text. Lucy was talking about that our images have alt text. Sometimes people want to be really, really helpful and really describe the image in full detail and be really, really verbose. Well, actually, you just really kind of want a concise, tell me what it is so I can move on, so that I'm not just struggling to read a paragraph of text. When we would glance at this image on the screen and understand it really quickly, we want to give that kind of equitable experience to screen reader users. So testing with users who have these disabilities can give us those insights where our good intentions maybe take us down a different path than we would have wanted to go in the first place. Yeah, so we're really happy to have that in place.
Thanks so much. I got a question around text being appropriate for students who have dyslexia? How does that work on the Newsela platform? That's definitely been a part of this conversation around the science of reading, which is reflected all over the world of education right now.
Absolutely. So the read aloud function, like you've talked about, that's something that's really helpful for dyslexic users as they're reading along. Also being able to adjust the font. There is a way that you can code the website where it will work with browser extensions that you can use. And Newsela is fully compatible in that regard. So like some really commonly used browser extensions like Google Read and Write, Helperbird, these free or very low cost if you're using premium services. These browser extensions give the ability to select the font that's right for you, choose the text spacing that's right for you. So imagine like you're looking at a web page, you can actually create white space between the letters with these plugins, just to create like lower the cognitive load. Maybe there's a font style that works really well for you as a reader. So you've got the ability to make those changes, which is really, really wonderful. So that, and you know, we've seen that just improve readers' ability in a way that paper text can't. I have nothing against paper text, but having this digital text gives us so many accommodations that can help so many readers. Even if you don't identify, even if you've got a student who wouldn't necessarily identify that you've got any kind of disability, there's not just disabilities that you would have a diagnosis for. There's also like, you're tired, you had soccer practice and you were up super late and you still have to read this article and you're like, oh my gosh, my eyes are so tired. Like to be able to increase the font size or, you know, make those kinds of changes, you have a situational disability, or you're at soccer practice. I don't know why soccer keeps them in, but it's really, really sunny and you've got your iPad and you've got to read it. And so you have to change the contrast settings to help you read it. Like there are all sorts of ways that we all have limitations from time to time. So yeah, Newsela really, I mean, this was a question about dyslexia, but you have the ability to work with those browser extensions and the own system settings on your devices to make things really work for you.
Yeah. So I think it's so important that you noted, right? It's in the code to make these things happen, right? So yes, there are ways in which we as educators and parents and students can look at this and make the change, but it's great to be able to partner with companies who have made this commitment as well and who are invested in it. Any other questions before I share some resources and wrap us up?
I didn't see anything else, Lucy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've loved what you've seen today and you want to hear more. Well, we have a couple of things. We'd love for you to be able to fill out a survey for us. Very quick. It'll take you less than 5 minutes. We're going to share this deck, and as Matt mentioned, we'll be able to share the YouTube recording as well. But we wanted to also enable you with some of those screen recordings that Amy so wonderfully narrated over, as well as a link out to the Bureau of Internet Accessibility WCAG checklist. We have the Newsela for Illinois landing page where you can find a lot of information about this topic. And then if you're interested in hearing about Newsela for your district specifically, we have Nikki's email here and you'll be able to get in touch with us. So I'm going to drop that survey link in the chat. So that you can fill that out. Make sure I give it to everyone. We'd love to be able to hear from you, hear about what you learned today, what you already know about WCAG, and we are so grateful for you joining with us today. And we'll stick around if you have any questions, but this concludes our presentation.
Well, seeing no other responses there in the chat or the Q&A, we'll draw this to a close. Once again, thank you very much. I'd like to remind everyone that recordings will be posted on our YouTube channel within 24 to 48 hours. And the evaluation forms for Illinois PD credit will be available to those who attended live during our recording today. Also within 24 to 48 hours. We hope you'll join us again for another LTC webinar. You can find those at ltcillinois.org/events/webinars. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.